The name of our podcast, TechSequences, is really a mashup of two words, technology and consequences. We are fascinated by the consequences, intended or unintended, of the internet and related technologies for the way we live, play, and work. We are your hosts, Leslie Daigle and Alexa Rod. We started our careers at the dawn of the internet and have been friends, colleagues, and comrades in arms for the better part of 20 years. In this podcast, we examine the impact internet-related technologies have made or may make in our lives. I'm Alexa Rod.
And I'm Leslie Daigle.
Welcome to TechSequences. Chances are, by now you've seen many videos or even memes of children doing or saying something funny or endearing. You may have even shared it with your followers or even a few close friends to bring laughter or joy. In the early days of the internet, these were just innocent, isolated moments. But today, a single viral video can instantly spawn a massive permanent media channel. Consider Ryan Kaji, who at just 3 years old began appearing in simple family recordings, opening toy packets and surprise eggs. That organic viral spark exploded into a global phenomenon. His toy unboxing continues to earn millions of dollars annually, cementing a multi-million-dollar business empire built entirely around his childhood. But this staggering commercial success comes with a darker reality. Now consider the case of teen social media star Piper Raquel and her content group called The Squad. Piper initially rose to massive fame as a child creator, documenting challenges and pranks curated by her mother, eventually generating millions of dollars annually. Yet behind the glossy, highly profitable facade lay a bitter multi-million-dollar legal feud. 11 families of the underage creators who performed alongside Piper in this content circle filed a massive $22 million lawsuit against Piper's mother, alleging severe financial exploitation, long working hours without compensation, and the systemic sabotage of the minor's own independent channels. These cases are not isolated anomalies. They are the highly visible tip of a massive, unregulated gold rush. Today, child creators with social media followings have catalyzed the growth of a dedicated 8 billion kidfluencer advertising industry. Top-tier child stars with 1 million or more followers routinely command $10,000 to $20,000 per sponsored post, with global brands spending over $2.4 billion a year specifically on family and Generation Alpha influencer campaigns. The staggering pool of capital illustrates that today, childhood fame has shifted from an accidental moment of visibility into an industrialized, platform-driven global market. Behind this push lies the algorithmic trap. Modern recommendation engines are systematically designed to incentivize optimization, pushing parents to turn everyday domestic life, family interactions, and childhood milestones into monetized digital content. This structural design creates an illusion of agency. While there are positive cases where minors claim that creating content is exactly what they love to do, navigating the nuances between genuine creative childhood play and systemic platform-mediated digital labor remains incredibly complex. Parents routinely use what is known as the calibrated amateurism, carefully staging authentic, raw, domestic family moments to justify what is, in reality, early childhood digital labor. As the Piper Raquel case underscores, this rapid transition has exposed critical gaps in the exploitation of minors, most notably a profound legal void. Traditional child labor laws established to protect minors on movie sets or factory floors completely fail when a parent acts simultaneously as the guardian, employer, manager, and banker. With no external regulators inside the domestic home, the standard legal frameworks governing hours, working conditions, and financial compensation disappears entirely. Compounding this regulatory failure is the issue of an involuntary digital footprint. Millions of minors are having permanent, algorithmically tracked identities constructed for them before they are even old enough to understand, let alone consent to, a public profile. Furthermore, The psychological and safety risks associated with overnight mimification and online incivility loom large, as viral visibility can compromise a child's safety and financial security in a matter of hours. Ultimately, this trend represents a massive societal shift that rewrites fundamental privacy norms for Generation Alpha by monetizing their developmental history. The question is no longer whether kids will be online, but how we manage the fallout of their commodification. Do we need swift regulatory interventions similar to France's right to be forgotten laws and mandatory trust funds for kidfluencers? And as we look to the future, where should the ultimate responsibility lie? With the parents holding the camera, the platforms engineering the algorithms, or somewhere in the regulatory space in between?
Our guest today is Dr. Crystal Abedin. Crystal is a professor of Internet Studies at Curtin University, director of the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab, and a world-renowned digital anthropologist specializing in vernacular Internet cultures and the monetization of digital visibility. She has published extensively, authoring 5 books, editing 4 volumes, and publishing over 250 articles on Internet celebrity. She is also the founder of the TikTok Cultures Research Network, an associate investigator at the ARC Center of Excellence for Digital Child, and the incoming editor-in-chief of New Media and Society. An influential policy voice, Crystal serves on major advisory panels, including TikTok's Content and Safety Advisory for Australia and New Zealand, and Instagram's Content Ranking and Recommendations Working Group, and she has consulted on child influencer policies for governments in Australia, Singapore, the UK, and France. Her pioneering research has won prestigious global accolades, including the Western Australia Young Tall Poppy Science Award and a place on the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list. In 2025, she was named the leading researcher in Australia in the field of communication, and she is consistently ranked in the top 0.2% of scientists worldwide in the field of communications and new media. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Alexa. Happy to be here.
So, your work outlines a paradigm shift from accidental visibility to an industrialized, platform-driven global market for child fame. What are the core structural differences between sort of legacy Hollywood stardom for children and today's internet-mediated child influencer economy?
Back in the day, if you were to think about the child celebrity industry, you would be able to pinpoint specific gatekeepers, infrastructure, policy, and guidelines that specify how these children are spotted, groomed, trained, and entered into the industry. There are guidelines, or at least very public industry-wide know-how for how to work with these children, how to treat them, what the basic expectations of their environmental safety, safeguarding their monetary earnings, their education provisions are, etc. For instance, the fact that underage actors and actresses on movie sets still have to have ongoing education, whether through a tutor that accompanies them on set or time off for them to also have recreation and rest. Now, this is only able to be regulated because we are talking about work in a workspace, semi-public, if not with sufficient eyes and surveillance to ensure that these guidelines are kept. Domestic spaces that they grow up in and live in are simultaneously their workspaces. So despite the best intentions, even if there are guidelines, if there is regulation or policy, it is very difficult to enforce these. It is also very difficult to gauge whether or not these are effective in safeguarding the rights of the child.
So estimates suggest that the top child creators like Piper Raquel and Ryan Kaji generated millions of dollars annually, but it was hard to locate reputable sources and figures for the size and global market. So what do we actually know about the true economic scale of child influencer industry globally, and why is tracking the financial footprints of this market so incredibly difficult?
Part of the reason why there are no quick, hard, fast figures on this is because we haven't yet agreed on a definition of who or what a child influencer is. This is the entire premise of my book, looking at child influencers and how children become entangled with social media fame. Depending on who you ask, for instance, brands, they may have very narrow definitions of what constitutes a child influencer, because this also then narrows down the locus of their responsibility of who they contract on paper, what due diligence they have to do, to whom they have to be answerable to. If you turn to regulators and government, they might have a whole lot of different definition on what child minor work might comprise. For instance, in a report published by the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab here at Curtin University that I direct, we found that some governments pinpointed dangerous work just premised on the fact that it's outdoors, in the weather, in the sun. Others premise this as factory work, production work, where it's repeated and you may be exposed to industrial chemicals or elements or dirt and dust. Others think through this in terms of time. If you're a minor and working on a weekday during schooling hours, that is of concern. So there is no consensus over what exactly is permissible work for children in general. In fact, some of these regulations go into slightly murkier waters, offering that if it's a family business, the child might be able to work limited hours under the guidance of a family member or a guardian, or if it's informal work that they may take up during, say, the school holidays or an internship for the older kids, that is permissible within specific confines. But as you can see, because governments haven't actually yet agreed on what child labor should be defined as and how to identify it, it's even harder to map this in the digital space. So therefore, whenever you're looking through broadsheets, looking for statistics, sometimes they're only really able to capture the most visible of child influences, pointing to the child YouTubers, as you have mentioned. In these instances, perhaps their numbers are a bit more public. You get to see the deals that they work through, the number of views, their followers, the brands that are listed, and also, of course, on YouTube, there are compulsory regulations that require you to disclose if something is a paid partnership. But then under the table, lots of other varieties of childhood fame and commerce online abound. For instance, think through the mom influencer who might be receiving payment for an advertisement for which she was contracted, but who may use her children in the collateral and the materials put on there. Think about the child who goes viral overnight on social media, after which the parent or the guardian is contacted to have that video and the likeness of the child syndicated and reposted. Oftentimes also landing invitations in press rooms, night to night shows, good morning shows, and having that celebrity circuit. Then think also about the children who are perhaps the most recognizable faces online as memes, who may not even know that they've got this whole other celebrity attached to their likeness, even though people don't know who they are, what their names are, where they live, what they do. The terrain is very long, very murky, very gray, and there's a variety of values and income attached to this. And because we haven't yet agreed upon how exactly we define child influencers, no one company will be confidently coming up to say, these are the figures, here are the highest income earners, and here are the issues we need to think through.
Just listening to you talk about that no one has agreed about what a child influencer is, it made me think of what Leslie was asking first, the comparables with the Hollywood stars. In the Hollywood star scenario, they had an agent. They would show up to a movie set. They had a production company. Maybe as you said, they had a tutor with them. There were certain working hours. But here, none of that, the brands look at the child influencers in terms of the number of followers or the sway that they have with their followers for purchases. But it's very difficult to draw parallels. Is the fact that this is so hard to define now making it very hard to put any kind of policy or regulatory frameworks around it? Is that one of the issues?
Well, let me take the example of Australia, where I live. Here in Australia, we have the Office of the Children's Guardian, and one of their recent priorities is to look specifically into child influencers or children entangled into the influencer industry. Concretely, they are identifying who the key stakeholders are in this space. However, there are limits to this. So let me give you an example. If a brand would like to produce a video and the child is required to come on set, that is a public space, then there are clear guidelines on how they must have a chaperone visible to them at all times. They must be able to have regular check-ins to ask about their welfare, their bio needs, and there must always be a trusted adult among them, even if they were, say, in the private cloisters of a dressing room or getting mic'd up. Now, this is a scene that can be clearly marked as a workspace, and therefore the Office of the Children's Guardian is able to put in very clear guidelines that also attract penalties if they're not met, mostly by the brands. There are other countries, for instance, France, who've got guidelines on how children on social media can be defined as child influencers, even if they're not yet earning a strong income, because their focus is on intention. If you're practicing the craft, regardless of whether or not you're earning an income, it means that you are in the industry or aspirationally so, and therefore the guidelines do apply to you. Rather than using income as a threshold, it's using their practice and their interests, motivation, and aspiration.
Wait, so just to be sure, if you're a child influencer, and you have an account, and let's say you have very, very few followers in France, because you have attempted to become one, you've shown the intention, you are identified as a child influencer, even though you're also not earning any money?
So in France, what they identify as not your income as a threshold, but the
Yeah.
practices, your displays, and your involvement in the industry. And I think
Mhm.
that is great because we only really hear about the terrible cases when
Yeah.
things go wrong too late. We only hear about the very successful cases of the top 1% of children. But the French model is preemptive, understanding that there's also a very long pipeline of children practicing or made to be practicing this kind of professionalism, and they're capturing them early on. But see, in both of these instances, the guidelines are very specific to situations that can be observed and defined. But in many other countries, when the work is a bit more informal, when it may be cash under the table, where the brands contract the parent or the adult and leaves it to them and the discretion over whether or not children are included filming in the workspace at home, then the boundaries are blurred and it's much more difficult to chat about regulation.
Mm.
I imagine it's also a lot more difficult to manage as a parent in the sense that, if you posted a video online because you thought it was cute and funny, and then you're approached by a company that wants your child to star in something, the initial reaction might be how interesting and fun this is, and that's it's an adventure, and I imagine it could be difficult to tell where the boundaries should be. But I mean, I guess as a separate consequence from that as well, as Generation Alpha grows up and their entire development histories are being archived and monetized, how does that impact them, sort of their reality, and the rewriting of fundamental privacy norms for the whole generation?
In my work as an anthropologist, I've had the privilege slash curse of working with a lot of these parents up close and personal, interviewing them over more than a decade or so in different locales across the Asia Pacific region. I would say that I've come across many well-meaning parents who were very candid about how when a post of theirs that they shared very sincerely, very genuinely, mostly for friends in their network, quote unquote, blew up or circulated very widely, they were faced with very hard decisions. For one, there was hard cash money dropping in their laps with people sending them all sorts of advertising opportunities or features. And on the other hand, they felt that the window for responding to these was very, very short. Sometimes on a good event, a matter of days, oftentimes a matter of hours. Now, imagine if you were a parent who was struggling to provide for your family, now realizing that this could be a very solid stream of income, no matter how short. I would not fault these parents for seeing this as a viable income stream, at least in the interim, provided they're given all the information they need about how to navigate this industry and what to consider. It is for this reason that here in Australia, we do recommend that these folks, these parents, consider partnering with influencer agencies who are trained specifically as experts to look for these blind spots in contracts or to protect the welfare of the new entrant into the scene. Some parents that I spoke to also tell me when they first started, their child was quote unquote in on it, happy to be involved in the content. It was a recreational activity. Many of them pointed to how this was a real bonding activity. In some of these interviews, the parents brought along their children. So while I had formal interviews with the parents, they would sometimes throw the conversation to the child and I could ask a few questions informally. And they were all very happy to say, yes, we enjoyed this, partly enjoyed the attention, mostly enjoyed this as an activity. But these parents also do recognize that as their children get older, their interests diverge, family schedules change, and they're now at this crossroads of thinking, Do I make them continue this craft because it's so viable, possibly our entire family's income stream? Or do I respect that my child is a child and has different interests? And here is where the reception I've received diverges. There are the parents who go with their gut, who respect that their child no longer wants to be in this scene. Some of them retire the older child and move on to the younger one, provided they're interested in the scene. Some of them leave the industry altogether. Some of them pivot to maybe parenting influencing, which allows them to exclude their child a bit more and focus on their own experiences. But there's still parents in my interviews and encounters who very firmly tell me, it's just difficult. I need to get them on set. This is how we make an income. We have to get through the day. Now, in the in-betweens, I met several parents who came up with very interesting strategies. One particular parent that I wrote about in my book from South Korea tells me that they started to put into their clauses and contracts with companies a no-show day. If on the day of the event, the filming, the invite, the child is having a meltdown, not feeling well, it's not good, it's written into the contract that they have to abide by their parental duties and call the thing off, understanding that there may be penalties or that they will work to reschedule. And although this turned away a lot of prospective brands and collaborators, the mom was very happy with the decision. She felt that the brands that continued working with her honored her values and ethos as a parent, and that was how she streamlined the massive volumes of opportunities coming her way to only work with brands that she felt were congruent with her ethics.
Wow, that's pretty forward-looking. You mentioned Korea, and I know you've done a lot of work in Korea, and that's where you see the phenomena of these industrialized star-making engines, where the parents are also cooperating, or I guess, with some of these companies who aim to train the children to dance, to sing, to perform, and seems to vet out anybody else who can't perform under the pressure of stardom. What have you found? What has been really surprising and interesting in your research when you're looking at this level of industrialization of child talent?
My research primarily focused in the Asia Pacific region, and I can say that across the East Asian countries and entities, they each have their own traditional or long-standing internal celebrity systems, also intersecting with children. For Korea specifically, one of the major factories of where children end up rising into internet fame is the idol trainee system. This is where children who identify or are identified as suitable talents may sign up with a training school or an agency. They might relinquish some of their online digital rights, for instance, agreeing to delete all their pre-existing social media and turn over their digital estates to the agency in exchange for sometimes sponsored in lieu of further payment training from the company that helps them become very factory cookie cutter type of idols in the future. Idols meaning they may debut as singers and dancers, either as soloists or in groups, but they're also given training to be all-encompassing celebrities who might pivot into hosting, acting, advertising, etc. Now, the reason why children are very entangled in this industry is because the grooming, the talent scouting, the signing up, the going for recreational classes to test if you may have the aptitude for it, all of this starts young. And in the Korean system, there are also schools that are designed to complement this art-based or art-focused primary schools or high schools that allow you to have some of your credits be documented through these training systems, that allow you some time off if you pursue this professionally as a career, where you can maybe do some work experience or alternative modes of assessment, still to graduate with your primary school, middle school, or high school certificate. But then there are also very clear-cut industry partners, cooperations, and guidelines for how these children filter through the system, what kind of legal rights they have, what happens to their income. Now, I'm not saying that these guidelines are fair, and clearly for some of the smaller agencies, these are entirely exploitative, but there are some guidelines in place that specify how children should be treated in this space. Now, social media has changed the game of this slightly. It is not uncommon now in the last 5 to 8 years for children across the world to aspire to enter the K-pop industry. Many of them do so either through international auditions that the companies hold. Many of them fly into Korea to do these auditions. But you'll realize there's also a very special category of mixed race, intercultural children who seem to have found a niche in this space. Most of the time, they're either Korean diaspora who are first, second, or third generation raised abroad. And so the iconic factor is that when they return to Korea as an overseas Korean, they have the correct type of
Mhm.
English accent, whether Australian, British, American, Canadian, that helps them stand apart from their colleagues. Others of them have one Korean parent and they're mixed race with another ethnicity or race, which gives them a distinctive look. Also
Mhm.
helps with their cross-institutional and international branding, that they can have fandoms or affiliations from Korea and elsewhere in the world. This has been a very interesting phenomenon because it's opened up very bio-organized ways of how specific types of children can find their footing in the industry by the sheer makeup of their DNA. And again, I don't want this to sound exotic because it's not new. Mixed race children have always found footings in celebrity industries. In a space like Japan, there's even a term to refer to these individuals, hafu, meaning half or half blood. Back in the day, this was probably a derogatory, condescending term because you're not pure, you're not completely wholly Japanese. But now in the Taranto, the talent industries in Japan, Hafus have found a niche as an iconic space of celebrities who can at once comment on Japanese culture as a pseudo foreigner, but on the other hand, they're also considered insiders in Japan who have a worldview of foreigners and can bring those perspectives in. So it's a very unique position, privilege that they have in the celebrity industries. But it also means that when the industry is so saturated, you can really only have one of a kind. You have to be the distinctive Black Japanese person, American Japanese person, Korean Japanese person. And if there's more than one of you in this space, you have to work hard to differentiate.
Hmm. I'm curious about what is the long-term uh, effects on the children. Some of the children that are now grown up, really, their stardom was in the early days of this whole phenomenon of the kidfluencer culture. And do you expect, what do you know about how they have viewed their career? Particularly, is there a difference between those who've been very successful and perhaps overexposed versus those who were simply trying to make it and didn't reach that level of success and fame? And then do you expect that to be different for this new generation who really have grown up under the microscope, if you will, of having had their private lives be digitized and distributed?
Let's consider the buffet of possible case studies. The
Mm,
internet is ridden with exposés and tell-alls from former child influencers who talk about issues of exploitation, issues of self-esteem, and what it's like now growing up into teenhood or adulthood. Not too different from the celebrity children of, say, the Disney or Nickelodeon broadsheets, and how they've grown up very public in the eye of many people surveilling them. We have then from online observation, folks like Ryan Kaji of Ryan's World, who despite now being well into puberty, spotting also facial hair, still seems to
mhm.
be positioned as the eternal child in their target group in the types of content that they post. And one wonders if they're allowed to grow up in this space and how far they're allowed to move from their brand. For some other child celebrities, the move is more seamless if they have correct type of guidance, if they are interested in this industry and continue to flourish. We see a lot of this from the Korean and Japanese industries, where there are clear pathways for the types of work open to cute, squishy toddlers in the baby modeling stage, to dancing toddlers and young children who join child performing groups, training for pop groups when they're young teenagers, pivoting to acting in their 20s, and then establishing themselves as veterans and as actors in the industry only in their early 20s and their early 30s. Now, these examples that we see, of course, also point to survivor bias. We only hear of those who literally have survived the industry and made it all the way through the trajectories and lineage. We hardly hear from those who have dropped out or who have tried to stay in the industry but were not successful. In my research, the children that I was very fortunate to speak to in the presence of their parents and guardians, some of them are quite clear that they enjoy this. And even if it's no longer monetizable, they wouldn't mind staying in the industry. So some of the early child influencers I've spoken to are now happily pursuing things like theater, the arts, acting, not online, but as their own hobbies alongside their schooling because they enjoy the craft. Some of them have pivoted into the back end of the industry, no longer being the face of the camera online, but then perhaps becoming the directors, script writers, or even the talent agents themselves, grooming others and helping them succeed in the industry. There are then also some children who have had very public crashes that brought an end to their career. Some of these would be the exposés that I've talked about. Others of these start as gossip in what I call ground zero in my book, the space of online forums where there is chatter about how a child may clearly be very discontent, unhappy, no longer willing to do this. Ground zero points to a detonation point where a bomb goes off. It's also where all activity starts. And for many of these child influencer scandals, online forums of very enthusiastic fans or haters is where all of these chatter begins. These children might be analyzed down to the crinkle of an eyebrow, a shiver in their hand, something to do with body language, perhaps something that's hiding in the background. And these online detectives really zoom in on the detail to make assertions that the child is not safe, exploited, or unhappy. Sometimes these get picked up by newspapers and investigative journalists and become a public conversation. Sometimes these also push policymakers to consider the rights of children in these spaces. And other times these provoke the child, guardian, and parent to come out to issue public statements and perhaps then truncate their careers, pivot to something else, or sometimes just ignore it altogether, continuing in that path of destruction. So these have been the templates we've seen of late of how these children grow up extremely online and then try to go extremely offline.
Hmm.
So you mentioned early on that there isn't an agreed definition globally of what is a child influencer, what is that market. But looking toward policy more generally, France has enacted specific right to be forgotten protocols for everyone and mandatory trust funds for child content creators. Do you think that these frameworks are scalable globally, or did they only just scratch the surface of the problem?
It's been implemented in France. There have been other countries that have implemented very fast and very clearly regulations to do with tax disclosures and to do with advertising transparency. I'm finding that in our review of regulations, whenever the taxman is involved and these child influencers and the parents need to disclose their income, those guidelines seem to be spelled out very clearly in terms of thresholds of earning, how you report gifts versus complementary experiences, cash money versus credits. And so we know there is precedence in having clarity on some sort of reporting specific to tax disclosures for children and influencers. I think it's not a big leap to demand that governments move from this kind of economic regulation to also consider the social well-being and welfare, perhaps even the culture of childhood online. So it's not a big ask. It will be a difficult exercise, working through definitions that are specific to each country, culture. It will be a dialogue rather than a top-down. But I do think it's overdue, and we do need to have eyes on this.
What about the cases where it seems where the parent is simultaneously the guardian, the cameraman, the producer, the marketer, as we mentioned, the banker? Have you seen any good, viable policies or regulations that have provided some level of transparency and also perhaps protection to the child?
Now, from a legal perspective, this is all very tricky because if the parent is the legal guardian slash the manager, then they are the default adult who is meant to oversee the welfare of the child, unless there is otherwise very clean, concrete evidence that the child is not safe with this bio guardian.
Mm-hmm.
For many people in the industry, the agencies may sometimes give advice, but again, they're not the authoritative voice taking charge of the ward. So, what we've seen industry practitioners do is recommend education and guidelines, giving out free tools, checklists, sheets, sometimes giving also paid consulting opportunities to parents, realizing that it's not possible to ask them to relinquish their rights, but we could nourish them, infuse them with information so that they can make this decision themselves. And should they feel that this is not their flavor of tea, this is not their cup of tea, then they may want to engage a professional to do this work instead. I know for a fact that going through some of the Japanese child industry work and looking at some of the Korean child celebrity work, many of these agencies do recommend that the parent remains as a parent, looking after the well-being of the child, leaving things like income, and deals and brand endorsements to a manager so
Mm.
that conflicts of interest are very clearly identified. But again, these are recommendations and they're not enforceable because, after all, the unit of culture, the unit of organization in society is the family, and
Yeah.
governments rely on parents to care for their minor children.
Yeah, and they have to be successful to a certain point to even be able to afford a business manager, which means the parent has to fulfill multiple roles until that point, right?
For sure. It can come with a cost. Some managers offer their services pro bono for a season, and if you like them, you sign with them. Others do so if you sign over some rights to them. But I've
Mm.
also come across agencies in Southeast Asia who genuinely offer maybe a couple of sessions for their parent to think through whether or not this is something they might want to do, just to build
Mm.
goodwill in the long run. And later on, should their services be needed, it then transits into a paid arrangement. I will also say that there are a lot of NGO groups who are concerned about the rights of the child. And despite their best efforts, though, most of what they put out are recommendations,
Mm.
guidelines, best practice, and they're not strictly enforceable. So the information is there, the education is there, but we need to think about how we can implement these good ideas and practices and whether or not there can be penalties enforced. And again, this all points to the state.
Well, thank you. This has been a really great overview for all of us watching, some of these memes and contents to think a little bit more about what it is we're really seeing. But if you were advising the parent of a child with a burgeoning social media channel, by way of taking us out of this episode, what would you advise that parent to do?
So many things. Where do I begin? If you're a friend of mine and we were having a casual coffee and I was speaking not as an expert, but as someone who's got a lot of research in this area, that is, I am not a manager. I don't work in industry. I'm just an academic with a lot of knowledge. I would say top three things to prioritize are one, there are going to be many commercial opportunities coming your way. Ensure that all of these are put in writing. Make sure things are in contract. Make sure the contract also includes protections for you and your child. Oftentimes, when things go viral very quickly, offers come under the table in a DM by word of mouth, and it's difficult to track or hold these offers accountable later. Number two, this seems a bit obvious, but chat with the child. Have them understand the consequence of what they might want to be doing next, help them understand how visibility online is very different from visibility in a family chat group, where people who love you by default of being your extended family think you're cute and wonderful and protect and love you. Whereas online, there are often many bad faith actors who will tear even children to shreds.
Mm.
Have them think through this and whether or not they're ready for the consequences. Think through also consent vehicles. If your child is not yet ready to have very extensive vocabulary to consent, are there any proxies you can use? For instance, are they happy on set? Do they seem like they don't want to get out of bed to do this thing? Do they have joy? Are they being avoidant? So, as a parent, you do need to learn these cues. The last thing I would say is that as a parent, your children are going to be growing up extremely online. It feels almost compulsory these days that to survive in society, to be enrolled in schools and get an education, to eventually qualify for a job in extremely LinkedIn culture, you need some sort of self-branding. In fact, there's only the very top 1%, very privileged, upper middle class people who can afford to have all of these networks set up being online that are protected. I would also ask them to think through the platforms that they use. What are the issues? What are the concerns? Do you want to use your child's government name? Is there a point at which you would stop engaging with their posts on social media because they have a recognizable face post-teenhood, post-puberty? And these are very long-term things to think about because things on the internet are online forever. Even if you think they can be deleted, digital footprints last and they circulate widely. Bear in mind, in the worst case scenario, there are child predators and very large messaging groups whose entire brand is taking very innocent videos and pictures of children and then sexualizing them for profit. And you do not want that to happen to your child. So while the opportunities abound in a very short span of time, I think worst case scenario doom planning is a very necessary exercise.
What great advice.
So much to think about. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Crystal. This has been fascinating.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this TechSequences podcast. We are Leslie Daigle and Alexa Rod. You can reach us by email, techsequences@techsequences.org. We'd love to hear from you to know what you thought about this episode or ideas for future episodes. TechSequences. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and subscribe through your favorite podcasting service.